For months, the sky had been quiet, cold, predictable, and somewhere beyond the reach of every telescope, a traveler was moving toward us, slow, silent, and ancient. Astronomers named it 3I Atlas, another interstellar visitor passing through our solar system. At first, it seemed ordinary, just another frozen body of dust and ice, the kind that drifts through the void for billions of years, forgotten by the stars that birthed it. But the waiting sky had other plans. When 3I Atlas crossed the ecliptic, the invisible plane where the planets dance around the sun, something strange happened. The light data started coming in, and it didn't make sense. Usually, when a comet approaches the sun, its brightness follows a predictable curve. It glows brighter as sunlight vaporizes its icy surface. The pattern is smooth, natural, alive in its own quiet rhythm. But Atlas wasn't smooth. Its light flickered, not randomly, but deliberately. A pulse, then another, then silence. It was as if something, or someone, was controlling how much light it gave off. In observatories across the world, astronomers double-checked their instruments. Maybe it was interference. Maybe it was just bad data. But as the hours turned to days, and the pulses kept coming at regular intervals, disbelief began to grow. One researcher at the European Southern Observatory described it as a heartbeat in the dark, a rhythm so precise it was impossible to call it natural. The first light curve they plotted looked more like code than comet dust. Imagine staring at a star field on your screen, 1,000 points of light flickering with cosmic randomness. And then, right in the middle of it, one object flashing in perfect intervals. 5 seconds. 5 seconds off. Again and again, like a message written in the rhythm of light. Was it mechanical? Was it reflecting sunlight in a strange way? Or had something built it? Something designed to be seen? By the second week of observation, news started to spread beyond the scientific community. In private group chats, in astronomy forums, in encrypted networks, whispers began. Have you seen the data on 3I Atlas? It's pulsing. It's not random. No one dared to say what everyone was thinking, that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a comet at all. NASA released a short statement. Current data shows a non-gravitational effect, possibly due to gas jets or surface fragmentation. A calm, professional answer, but to those watching closely, it felt hollow. Because gas jets don't create perfect timing. They don't stop and start every 5 seconds like a ticking clock. Something else was happening. That's when the first anomaly appeared in the infrared readings. 3I Atlas wasn't reflecting sunlight like a dusty body should. Its thermal signature was inconsistent, cooling and reheating in cycles, as if the object itself was managing energy. In other words, it was acting alive. And deep down, even the most rational scientists began to feel that quiet, unnerving thought creep in. What kind of object adjusts its own brightness? By now, the comet, or whatever it was, had crossed into the sun's gravitational reach. Normally, this is where comets flare up. Their tails ignite, releasing clouds of gas and dust that glow like ghostly banners against the stars. But Atlas didn't ignite. It dimmed. The pulse grew slower, like a machine entering sleep mode. And then it went completely dark. For 3 full days, it vanished from every instrument on Earth. No light, no reflection, nothing. Astronomers called it the blackout window. Others called it the silence. When it reappeared, everything changed. Its orbit had shifted, slightly but noticeably, in a way no natural body should have been able to do. It was as if it had corrected its path. One analyst at JPL described it perfectly. It behaved like a probe adjusting trajectory. Those words were never meant for the public, but they leaked, as they always do, and the waiting sky grew restless. In the weeks that followed, more data came in, more confusion. The light patterns returned, but this time they weren't steady pulses. They were clusters, bursts, encoded variations that didn't fit any known natural model. A mathematician in Prague found prime number sequences embedded in the light curve. Another researcher in Japan noticed repeating intervals matching the rotational period of Earth's magnetic field. Coincidence? Maybe, but coincidence has limits. By now, people weren't just studying Atlas. They were watching it, like something watching back. Every new frame from the telescopes felt heavier, more intimate, as if we were looking at something that had been designed to look back at us. The silence between the flashes became louder than the light itself. It wasn't the data that haunted them. It was the feeling that something intelligent was just sitting there, waiting. In one of the last clear captures before it moved too close to the sun, the Hubble telescope recorded an unusual reflection, not diffused, not scattered. It was focused, a narrow beam of reflected sunlight, sharp and clean, cutting through the cosmic dust like a blade of glass. Some described it as beautiful. Others called it impossible. One thing was certain. 3I Atlas was unlike any comet we'd ever seen. It was behaving with intention, and yet no one could explain why. Not NASA, not the European Space Agency, not even the AI-assisted analysis tools trained to detect artificial light signatures. Every answer led to more questions. Was it tumbling metal, a natural crystal formation, a remnant of something ancient, or something built? Every theory bent under the weight of its own logic. So the world waited. Telescopes tracked. Data streamed. And in the middle of that silence, one question grew louder than the rest. What if it's not a comet at all? What if we've been staring at a machine, one older than the human race, passing quietly through our solar system and leaving only patterns of light behind? They called it 3I Atlas. But maybe that name was never meant for what it truly was. Because what followed next, the signals, the heat, the impossible orbit, would make even the most skeptical scientist whisper the same haunting thought. Maybe we were never alone in the waiting sky. At first, no one noticed. It was just a faint flicker buried inside a sea of static, a dim heartbeat lost among the stars. But as days passed, the noise grew stronger, more defined, more deliberate. Across the world, in Chile, Hawaii, India, and Japan, telescopes caught the same thing. A repeating pulse, steady, rhythmic, perfectly synchronized. And that's when people started to realize this wasn't random. This was order, hiding inside the chaos. Every time 3I Atlas rotated, it sent out a precise flash of light, the same duration, the same delay. 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, like the ticking of an invisible clock floating in the dark. Astronomers compared data, cross-checked their logs, and still the rhythm held true, identical across hemispheres, across instruments, across continents. Whatever this was, it wasn't just happening in one sky. It was happening everywhere. One observatory in Chile recorded it for 36 hours straight. No interruptions, no pattern breaks. And when the data was converted into audio frequencies, the sound that came out was haunting. A pulse, calm, measured, almost breathing. It felt alive. Some researchers laughed it off, just rotational brightness, they said. Others stayed silent, staring at the monitor, feeling something deep in their gut whisper that this wasn't natural, because nature doesn't count in perfect time. NASA quietly reached out to global observatories, asking them to keep the data offline until they verified consistency. In other words, keep it quiet. But secrets don't stay buried in the age of the internet. Within days, leaked graphs began appearing in astronomy forums, the same repeating pattern across different observatories. Someone plotted the intervals on a timeline, and the result looked unmistakable. A binary sequence, on, off, on, like an ancient Morse code written in light. That's when the whispers started. Is it a signal? Is someone trying to communicate? Could this be artificial? For every scientist that dismissed the idea, 2 more stayed late in their labs, staring at the flickering rhythm on their screens, unable to look away, because deep down, they all knew. No comet had ever done this before. Then came the breakthrough. A team at the European Space Agency noticed something strange. The time gap between pulses wasn't exactly 5 seconds. It was 5.001. The difference was so small, it seemed meaningless. But when plotted over a longer time frame, it formed a secondary rhythm, a slow oscillation, like a hidden metronome. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a structure, and behind that structure, math. Every living thing has rhythm, the beating of a heart, the blinking of an eye, the cycles of night and day. But this was different. It was geometry made visible, ratios aligned with prime numbers, frequencies mirrored in Fibonacci intervals, all hidden inside the light curve. One researcher in Prague called it too perfect to be natural. Another wrote, anonymously, "This isn't a reflection, it's a response." The data was sent to independent labs, including a small team of astrophysicists in Tokyo. They cleaned the noise, amplified the signal, and what they found changed everything. The pulse wasn't originating from sunlight bouncing off the object's surface. It came from within it. Something inside 3I Atlas was emitting light, a cold, consistent luminescence that no cometary material could produce. And its wavelength? Not standard visible light, but near infrared. The kind used by communication systems. That single discovery split the scientific community in half. Half insisted it was a measurement error, an instrument glitch. The other half began to whisper that forbidden word again. Artificial. The idea that an object from another star system, one that behaved like a comet, could be transmitting a signal was unthinkable. Because if it was transmitting, then someone had built it, and that meant we were not the only ones who looked at the stars and wondered. As the data spread, something eerie happened. Amateur astronomers began picking up the pulse with small backyard telescopes equipped with photometers. It didn't take high-end instruments anymore. The pulse was strong enough, visible enough, for anyone to find if they knew where to look. And that's when the rhythm began to change. On the 14th day of observation, every telescope around the world recorded a shift. The intervals stretched. 5 seconds became 6. 6 became 7. Then, the pulse stopped. Complete silence. For hours, the object emitted nothing. Then, without warning, a final flash burst across the dark. Longer, brighter, sharper than anything before. And when scientists converted that burst into binary data, it formed a single repeating pattern: 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, an 8-bit string. The exact number of bits in 1 byte of computer code. Coincidence? Maybe. But for those who watched that data scroll across their screens, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like intention. The media caught wind of it weeks later, calling it the pulse in the dark. Anchors laughed. Pundits speculated. People on the internet made wild theories about alien beacons and cosmic distress calls. But somewhere, behind all the noise, scientists sat in quiet disbelief because they'd seen the raw data. They'd watched the rhythm form, the timing shift, the final flash, and they knew what randomness looked like. This wasn't it. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the pulse vanished completely. No reflection, no signal, nothing. Just the silent trajectory of an object moving steadily toward the sun. It was like watching a heart stop beating in the middle of deep space. And yet, even in its silence, the echo of that rhythm haunted every researcher who had ever recorded it. Because once you hear a pattern that perfect, you can't unhear it. Weeks later, an astrophysicist compared the pulse intervals to the hydrogen line, the universal frequency of communication used in theoretical SETI models. It matched, almost perfectly. The odds of that happening by chance were astronomical. So if this wasn't coincidence, then what was it? Was it a message? A test? A beacon waiting for an answer? Or something far older, something simply observing us from the dark? Whatever it was, 3I Atlas had sent its pulse, and then it went silent. No trace left in the noise, no heat signature, nothing measurable, just the echo of a question hanging in the blackness of space. A question humanity wasn't ready to answer. Was it signaling something or someone? Space is supposed to be cold, silent, predictable. Out there, everything follows rules. Physics, gravity, thermodynamics. Nothing changes unless something forces it to. But when astronomers turned their infrared eyes toward 3I Atlas, those rules began to break. At first, it was subtle, a tiny shift, a faint spike on the temperature charts. No one thought much of it. Comets heat up as they near the sun. It's what they do. Ice vaporizes, dust glows. Simple, ordinary. But Atlas wasn't ordinary. Because when it heated up, it cooled down again. Not gradually, instantly, like something switching off. And then, a few hours later, it reheated, exactly to the same temperature as before, down to the decimal. Astronomers stared at the data, thinking their instruments had glitched. They recalibrated the sensors, they checked for cosmic interference. But every test came back clean. The heat fluctuations were real. And worse, they followed a rhythm, a cycle. Cool, heat, cool, heat, over and over, like a living thing conserving energy. It didn't make sense. In space, nothing cools itself deliberately. There's no atmosphere, no mechanism for temperature control. Yet this object, this supposed rock from another star, seemed to regulate itself. One scientist described it best. It's as if something inside knows exactly how much energy to release and when to stop. The sentence sent a chill through the room, because knowing isn't something comets do. Over the next few days, teams from NASA, ESA, and JAXA began collecting independent data. Every reading told the same story. The thermal pattern of Atlas wasn't random. It was structured, like a pulse. When they mapped the temperature changes against time, they saw repeating intervals that mirrored the earlier light fluctuations. It was as if the two were connected, heat and light, rising and falling together, synchronized like gears in an invisible machine. A pattern no natural body should produce. That's when things got even stranger. During one of the cooling phases, the object's surface temperature dropped below what physics allows for a sunlit object. So cold, in fact, that it began absorbing more energy than it reflected, almost like it was storing it. Imagine that. A piece of cosmic ice drifting through space, absorbing sunlight instead of burning up in it, as if the object had decided to stop wasting energy and keep it for itself. That's not behavior. That's control. And that's when the theories began. Some called it a hollow object, a shell around an unknown core. Others suggested an artificial regulator, maybe a thin surface of reflective metal adjusting its heat levels, like solar panels that could open or close. But one theory stood above them all, that the object was alive. Not alive in the biological sense. No cells, no DNA. But something far older. Something that had learned to survive the vacuum. A machine with instincts. The press had no idea what to do with this story. "Alien technology!" screamed one headline. "Impossible data confuses NASA," said another. But in the observatories, there was no laughter, no jokes, only silence. Because every scientist looking at that thermal map knew they were watching something that should not exist. And yet, it was right there, drifting quietly through our solar system, warming itself, cooling itself, like a heart beating in the dark. They called it the thermal anomaly. But that name didn't do it justice, because this wasn't just an anomaly, it was behavior, and behavior means intent. One astrophysicist wrote in her report, behind closed doors, it spread. Weeks passed, the readings continued. At perihelion, the point closest to the sun, scientists expected the object to reach extreme temperatures, the way comets always do. Instead, it did the opposite. It cooled again. Even as sunlight poured over it, the object absorbed nothing. Its temperature dropped until it nearly vanished from infrared sensors. Then, suddenly, in one blinding spike, it released all that stored heat in a single burst. A massive flare of energy that stretched across multiple wavelengths. Every telescope pointed at it went white, and just as quickly as it began, it ended. Back to silence. Back to the void. No explosion, no debris, no breakup. Just control. That's when the word efficiency appeared in the reports. Because what everyone saw in that perfectly timed release wasn't chaos. It was optimization, a deliberate balance between energy intake and output, as if the object was calculating how much it needed to survive each phase of its journey, like an organism engineered to outlast the stars. And still, the question no one wanted to say out loud hung in the air. Could a rock from the void understand efficiency? Could something drifting between galaxies learn? In one late-night analysis session, a researcher compared Atlas's thermal pattern to data from human satellites. The similarity was unsettling. Satellites, when managing power, cycle heat the same way, warming and cooling to protect internal systems. And 3I Atlas was doing exactly that. Except this object wasn't made by us, and it wasn't built for us. It had been wandering through space for God knows how long, perfectly maintaining its internal balance. Not dead, not alive. Something in between. When news leaked that the object's infrared spectrum matched no known material, panic quietly began to ripple through the scientific community. It wasn't rock. It wasn't ice. It wasn't metal. It was something else. A substance that behaved like a conductor. One that could absorb and release heat at will. Almost as if the entire object was built to adapt. Like a machine that could hibernate in darkness and wake in sunlight. And the deeper the scientists looked, the more human their fear became. Because everything they discovered about this object hinted at one truth. It wasn't visiting. It was observing, watching, testing, maybe learning how our star behaves. Maybe learning how we behave when something breaks the rules of the universe. In the following days, observatories reported a faint shift in its orbit, slight but measurable, as if, after its last heat burst, it had adjusted itself once again, like it was preparing for the next move. But where? And why? No one could say. All they could do was watch, as that silent traveller drifted further into the light of the sun. Cooling, heating, conserving, just enough to keep going. The headlines would fade, the scientists would move on, but the data would remain, a perfect record of something that broke the laws of thermal logic, something that should have melted, shattered, or burned away, and didn't. Something that refused to die. And deep down, one thought would never leave their minds. What kind of object knows how to survive the impossible? What kind of machine can feel the heat and choose to endure it? It started with light, simple sunlight, the one constant every object in our solar system must obey. When light hits a comet, it scatters. It bounces off uneven surfaces, fragments of dust and frozen ice, spreading in every direction like a silent explosion of reflection. That's what every model predicts. That's what physics promises. But when 3 Ayatollahs drifted between the Earth and the Sun, that promise broke. At first, the data looked wrong. Reflectivity values, albedo readings, were far too high. Some even exceeded 1.0, which, in physics, means impossible. Nothing in nature reflects more light than it receives, yet Atlas did. In Chile, the Very Large Telescope captured the first anomaly. Beams of sunlight bouncing off its surface in narrow, defined streaks. Not scattered, not diffused, beamed, like tiny spotlights cutting through the cosmic dark. Every astronomer in the control room fell silent, because what they were seeing wasn't how comets behaved. It looked more like reflection from polished metal. Over the next few days, other observatories confirmed it. The Keck Observatory in Hawaii, the Subaru Telescope in Japan, the European Southern Observatory in Chile. All saw the same thing, identical beams of reflected sunlight, focused into precise angles. Each one seemed to originate from a fixed set of coordinates on the object's surface, almost as if someone had placed mirrors there. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the word hung in the air anyway. Artificial. That was the only explanation that made sense, and yet it made no sense at all. Because if the surface was truly metallic, if those reflections were controlled, then 3I Atlas wasn't just reflecting light, it was shaping it. One of the researchers described it best. When the sun hit it, it didn't just shine back, it responded. The reflections weren't random. They followed the sun's angle like a mechanical iris, adjusting and realigning as it moved closer to perihelion. Like a mirror system tracking its light source, the object was reacting. When they zoomed in on the high-resolution images, the surface revealed something even more disturbing: symmetry. Long hexagonal patterns, arranged like tiles, covering parts of the object's exterior. At first glance, it looked like mineral formation, but the lines were too straight, too consistent. Nature doesn't draw perfect geometry. Machines do. Scientists argued endlessly. Some said it was crystalline ice refracting sunlight. Others insisted it was an illusion, light bending through dust trails. But a small, quiet group of physicists saw something more deliberate. The reflections weren't just bending light, they were encoding it. Each beam flickered with subtle variations in intensity and wavelength, like data, binary information written in brightness. Light as language. When you think about it, it makes sense. If something wanted to communicate across the void, across billions of kilometers where sound can't travel, what better medium than light? It's universal, predictable, and visible to anyone advanced enough to measure it. Was 3I Atlas doing that? No one could prove it. But no one could explain it away either. NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab ran a deep spectral analysis. They expected to find simple reflection signatures, water ice, carbon compounds, maybe silicates. What they found instead shook the team. The reflective wavelengths corresponded to materials we'd never observed in nature. Alloys that only exist in laboratory conditions. The reflectivity wasn't just high, it was engineered. Some surfaces absorbed nearly all incoming energy. Others reflected almost perfectly, as if designed to control heat and light simultaneously. Like a stealth coating or armor. The more data came in, the more human it all began to feel. Because everything about Atlas's surface seemed intentional. The way it cooled itself, the way it pulsed with heat, and now the way it used sunlight like a mirror signal. Each observation connected to the next, like chapters in a design manual. It was behaving like an object built to survive and communicate in deep space. One researcher, who had spent months studying its reflectivity map, said something that haunted everyone who heard it. It's wearing a disguise. At first, no one understood what she meant. Then, she explained, if the object could control how much light it emitted and reflected, it could effectively hide itself. It could appear bright when it wanted attention, and dark when it wanted silence. A mirror or a mask. That theory spread quickly and quietly, because if it were true, then 3I Atlas wasn't just some lost artifact drifting through the cosmos. It was active, choosing when to reveal itself, choosing when to disappear. In one of the final infrared passes before the object moved too close to the sun, scientists observed something chilling. During a brief flare of sunlight, one region of the object's surface shifted. Its reflectivity angle changed, not gradually, but suddenly, a movement too precise to be caused by melting ice or shifting debris, almost like a panel rotating, a mechanism responding to observation. Within hours, communication between telescopes began to fail. Data streams that had been stable for weeks went offline, not from a technical issue, but from interference. The same interference that radiates when strong electromagnetic fields collide with instrument frequencies. In other words, something was emitting energy nearby, And then, once again, the object went dark. No reflection, no signal, just the endless, silent void. What remained on record were fragments, moments frozen in data logs. The last recorded reflection before the blackout wasn't random. It formed a perfect geometric pattern, a triangle surrounded by 3 dots of equal brightness. Some called it a coincidence. Others saw it as a message. A simple shape, ancient, universal, like the signature of something intelligent, something leaving a mark before disappearing again. For now, all we know is this. 3i Atlas didn't just passively reflect sunlight, it manipulated it, bent it, used it. And if light is the oldest form of communication in the universe, then maybe, just maybe, this was its way of speaking, not through sound, not through radio, but through mirrors in the dark. And as it drifted deeper toward the sun, shimmering like a mechanical ghost cloaked in dust, one question echoed across every observatory, every sleepless lab, every quiet night spent staring at the data. Was this a mirror or a mask? Sometimes the truth hides inside the noise. That's what one young data analyst believed when he stayed behind long after everyone else had gone home. It was 2 a.m, and the lab was quiet, except for the soft hum of servers processing the light data from 3i Atlas. He wasn't supposed to be there. The project had been paused. Officially, they'd collected enough information. But something about the signal wouldn't leave his mind. It felt incomplete, too deliberate to be random, too structured to ignore. So he opened the raw files again and started listening. The light curve, the graph of brightness over time, was messy at first glance. Peaks and valleys, spikes and dips, like a heartbeat drawn in light. But as he zoomed in, he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. The spikes weren't random, they repeated. Not perfectly, but close enough that his gut told him to look deeper. So he ran a statistical model, then another. Each one confirmed the same thing, a pattern, hidden beneath the noise. For hours he aligned the data, smoothing out errors, separating natural light interference from true signal. And then it appeared, a ratio 3, 5, 7. Repeating again and again, hidden between the pulses. At first, he didn't understand. Then it hit him. Those were prime numbers. 3, 5, 7. The simplest mathematical fingerprint of intelligence. He froze. In nature, you don't see sequences like that. Not in comets, not in asteroids, not in the random light of space. Prime numbers are the building blocks of math. Every intelligent species, if any existed out there, would understand them. They're the universal signature of order. And 3i Atlas was pulsing them in light. He triple-checked everything. Instrument noise? No. Cosmic rays? Unlikely. Sensor error? Impossible. Every observatory reported the same rhythm. The pattern wasn't in the equipment. It was in the object. It was intentional. He sent the data to a colleague overseas, an astrophysicist in Japan, known for decoding radio bursts. Her response came hours later. 3 words. I see it. She ran a Fourier transform, a mathematical tool used to detect hidden frequencies inside chaotic signals. And what emerged was terrifyingly clear. The pulse wasn't random energy. It was structured information, encoded, layered, deliberate. When she plotted the intervals in 3-dimensional space, the sequence formed a spiral, a perfect logarithmic curve, the same spiral seen in galaxies, hurricanes, and the DNA helix, patterns that nature loves. Except this wasn't nature creating it. This was something using nature to speak. For days, the analysts worked in secret, comparing notes, running simulations. They didn't tell their supervisors. They didn't release the data. Because deep down, they knew what this meant. If the light pattern was real, it was a message. And once you find a message, there's always a question behind it. Who sent it? In the data logs, there were faint modulations, tiny changes in the amplitude of the light, like someone whispering through static. When converted to sound, the noise produced a low rhythmic hum, almost like a voice, just beyond comprehension. The kind of sound that makes the air in the room feel heavier. It wasn't just light. It was communication, encoded in the oldest medium the universe knows, photons. They called it the prime signal. An elegant structure woven into the pulse of a comet that shouldn't even exist. The ratio grew more complex over time. 3, 5, 7 became 11, 13, 17 each. New prime introduced with flawless timing. It was as if the object was teaching, counting upward, one layer at a time, like it wanted to see if someone was listening closely enough to follow. The deeper they looked, the more unsettling it became. Between each sequence, there were pauses, deliberate gaps that repeated at fixed intervals. When those gaps were converted into binary, on and off, light and dark, it formed symbols. Simple at first, then increasingly intricate. Not human, not random, structured, predictable, alive. At one point, the analyst realized something that made his hands tremble. The length of each sequence matched the exact rotational period of Earth. It wasn't just sending numbers, it was timing them to us, like it knew we were watching. By now, the secret was leaking. Someone inside the research chain passed the data to an independent astronomer in Switzerland, who uploaded part of the sequence online. Within hours, forums exploded with theories. Some said it was alien code. Others said it was a government experiment. A few even claimed it was a warning. But the analysts who'd seen the unfiltered data knew something the public didn't. The pulse had changed again. It was no longer repeating primes. It was mirroring our own transmissions. They discovered it when comparing the signal to archived radio data. Every time Earth had sent a transmission, a radar ping, a satellite burst, a deep space call, Atlas had responded with a matching pulse, delayed by a few hours. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. It was interacting. Not broadcasting outward, but echoing back what it received, like a mirror reflecting communication, or like a listener acknowledging a call. The realization hit everyone at once. This wasn't just a message. It was a conversation, and it had already started. For days, the pulse continued. Prime numbers, then silence. Then Earth's radio echoes returned as light. Some scientists thought it was curiosity. The object was learning how to speak our language. Others thought it was mimicry, repeating what we sent to study how we'd react. But a few believed something darker, that it wasn't communicating at all. It was listening, watching the way we search, record, analyze, and question, measuring our behavior through the lens of our own curiosity, like a cosmic test to see if we were ready to understand what was truly out there. Eventually, the pulse stopped just like before. No fade out, no warning. One moment, it was there, alive, steady, filled with meaning. and the next it vanished into silence, leaving behind only data. Rows of numbers that looked simple, almost meaningless, until you realized the pattern had never ended. It had just shifted into frequencies we couldn't track anymore. No one knows if 3i Atlas was trying to talk to us, or if we were the ones being observed. But one thing is certain: the light we saw wasn't chaos. It was a message, written in the language of the universe. A message we might not have been meant to read. And as scientists stared at the data that once pulsed like a heartbeat across the stars, one haunting question lingered in every mind. If it's communicating, who or what is listening? It happened overnight. One moment, the data was flowing, steady, rhythmic, alive. The next, everything went dark. Every telescope on Earth that had been tracking 3i Atlas suddenly went quiet. No pulse, no reflection, no signal. Just silence, like the universe itself had exhaled and stopped breathing. At first, people thought it was a glitch, maybe an instrument failure, a server crash, some technical hiccup lost in the static of deep space. But as the hours turned into days, and still nothing, the silence started to feel deliberate, too perfect, too synchronized. Every observatory across every time zone reported the same thing. The data feed had vanished at the exact same moment. Not delayed, not staggered, instant. Like someone or something had flipped a switch. Inside the European Southern Observatory, a technician tried to reload the previous logs, but the files were gone. Not corrupted, not unreadable. Deleted, vanished from the server. Every copy, every backup, even the automatic mirroring systems that replicated data to off-site locations, erased. The archive showed a single timestamp where everything stopped. 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds UTC, and next to it, a blank space. No metadata, no signature, just a void. Around the same time, observatories in Hawaii, Japan, and India began reporting strange errors. When researchers tried to access old light curve records of 3i Atlas, the databases redirected. Every single query rerouted to government networks. No explanation, no access, just a quiet message on the screen. Data restricted. Contact administrator. Except there was no administrator. No contact listed. No reply. That's when people began to panic. Not the public. They didn't know yet. But inside the astronomy community, a quiet unease began to spread. Emails were sent, then encrypted, then stopped entirely. Researchers, who had once shared data openly, began disappearing from discussion boards. Teams that had been exchanging theories and code went silent. Even those who still had fragments of the old data were too afraid to speak, because something bigger was happening behind the scenes, something that didn't want the light to be seen. Within a week, the International Astronomical Data Servers were temporarily shut down for maintenance. NASA's Solar System Dynamics page replaced all Atlas-related entries with generic placeholders. ESA's archives went into scheduled update mode, and the few amateur astronomers who still tried to track Atlas manually found that their software stopped syncing to the public sky maps. Coordinates had changed, like the object had been erased. Then, quietly, the official story appeared. A short press release from multiple agencies, almost identical in wording. They called it a data compression failure. They said the readings were inconclusive and that Atlas was no longer observable. They suggested it had likely disintegrated under solar radiation, But those who'd seen the raw data knew that wasn't true, because comets don't just vanish in perfect silence. They die loudly. They leave trails, dust, fragments. But Atlas left nothing. No debris, no trail, no evidence it had ever existed at all. Even stranger, the silence didn't stop with the data. Telescopes began reporting power disruptions, systems failing mid-observation whenever they pointed near the coordinates where Atlas had last been seen. One private observatory in New Mexico captured a short burst of static before its mainframe crashed. When they rebooted, the footage was gone. But technicians swore they saw something, just for a second, before the feed went black. A flash, a reflection, like a mirror turning away. Rumors began spreading through underground channels, whispers of classified directives issued to major observatories, reports of technicians being told to stop monitoring specific regions of the sky. Some said it was a cybersecurity measure. Others said it was censorship. But no one could answer the one question everyone was thinking. What could be so dangerous about reflected light? Months passed. The story faded from public view. Scientists moved on to new projects. Satellites were repositioned. The sky grew quiet again. But not everyone forgot. A handful of independent researchers began comparing the timestamps from the deleted data. They found something chilling. Every system, from radio observatories to weather satellites, had logged an identical, unexplained spike at that same moment. 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds UTC. A power fluctuation across multiple continents. Even non-astronomical sensors, communication relays, aviation satellites, recorded an interruption in their transmissions for exactly 3 seconds. Then everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But what could cause a global interruption like that? A blackout across frequencies. Some thought it was a solar flare, but no flare was recorded. No geomagnetic storm. No natural cause. Whatever had happened had come from the direction of Atlas. And then, just as suddenly, stopped. A few months later, strange things began showing up in archived data backups. Ones that hadn't been connected to the network at the time. Old, offline drives. When researchers accessed them, they found traces of interference, data fragments that shouldn't have existed. Encrypted strings buried inside noise, almost like something had written into the data before it disappeared. It wasn't human code. It wasn't random either. It was structured, mathematical, precise. The same prime number sequences seen before, but with one difference. They were reversed. If the earlier signals had been a message, this felt like an answer, but no one could read it. Every attempt to decode it led to corrupted results. Images of static, meaningless symbols. And yet, one researcher noticed something that made their blood run cold. When you played the data visually, frame by frame, the distortion wasn't random noise. It was a pattern of light, forming shapes, repeating every few seconds, 3 points of brightness, orbiting a central one. The same geometric triangle last seen in the reflectivity patterns before Atlas went dark. To this day, no one knows who deleted the archives. No one knows where the data went. But one thing is certain, the silence wasn't natural. Something wanted the world to stop looking. Something that had the power to turn off the sky itself. Maybe it wasn't a cover-up. Maybe it was containment. Maybe someone realized that whatever 3 Atlas truly was, it wasn't finished yet, because sometimes Silence isn't the end of a story. It's the warning before the next transmission begins. For weeks, the sky was silent. After the blackout, after the data vanished, everyone thought it was over. 3I Atlas was gone. Another mystery swallowed by the void. But then, something happened, something no one could explain. It began as a flicker, a faint, invisible tremor picked up by a deep space telescope in Chile. At first, the signal looked like background radiation, weak, meaningless, but the pattern was familiar. The pulse, that same silent rhythm that had once echoed across the stars, had returned. Only this time, it didn't come from sunlight or reflection. It came from within. Infrared sensors caught it first. A sudden spike in temperature where there should have been nothing. The heat levels climbed rapidly, faster than any natural object could generate. In just 30 seconds, Atlas went from freezing cold to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. And then, just as fast, it dropped back down, instantly, back to near absolute zero. No explosion, no debris, no sound. Just a flare of impossible energy followed by perfect silence. It was like watching a star breathe, alive, aware, awakening. For days, scientists tried to make sense of it. They compared it to solar radiation, to plasma ejection, even to controlled fusion. But nothing matched. The radiation signature wasn't solar. It wasn't cosmic. It was structured like an engineered release, a controlled pulse of power, something intelligent. Imagine it, an object from another star system, drifting silently through space, and then suddenly igniting from within, not from sunlight, not from collision, from something internal. Like a machine coming back online. The readings were terrifyingly specific. The energy burst lasted exactly 12.7 seconds. That number repeated across every independent measurement. NASA, ESA, and private observatories all confirmed it. 12.7 seconds. The same across continents, across instruments, across time. Not chaos. Precision. When translated into binary intervals, that number formed a ratio identical to one seen before. The same mathematical fingerprint found in Atlas's earlier light pulses. The message wasn't random. It was continuity. It was like the object was resuming a transmission. That humanity had interrupted. And it wasn't just light anymore. This time, the object emitted something new. A wave of electromagnetic radiation across multiple frequencies. A pulse that spread through the solar system like an invisible tide. It wasn't destructive, but it was detectable everywhere. From satellites in low orbit, to probes near Jupiter, to radio antennas buried deep beneath Antarctic ice. Everything recorded the same faint hum. A single resonant frequency pulsing from 3I Atlas. Then, for the first time in months, images began to reappear. A faint silhouette on the edge of solar observation arrays, small but sharp. The shape of Atlas had changed. No longer irregular, no longer comet-like. Now it appeared symmetrical, clean lines, sharp edges, a geometric form rotating slowly in the dark. It wasn't tumbling like a rock. It was spinning with purpose, perfectly balanced, perfectly stable, like an engineered craft adjusting orientation. Panic spread quietly through scientific circles. Governments locked down data channels again, but it was too late. Amateur astronomers had already caught glimpses of it. And once again, The internet ignited with theories. Some said it was dying, the final heartbeat of a dying object. Others believed the opposite, that it was awakening, that we had witnessed the moment something ancient came alive. The fusion-like flare wasn't random. It emitted heavy ion particles, usually produced in artificial reactors. And those particles weren't spreading evenly. They were directional, focused, a controlled emission aimed precisely along its new trajectory. It was as if Atlas had recharged itself and then corrected its course. Its path, once predictable and passive, now began to shift, ever so slightly, but deliberately. Instead of drifting towards the outer system as expected, it adjusted. By only fractions of a degree, yet that change would alter its long-term trajectory by millions of miles. It was moving towards something. But what? As it neared the sun again, the sensors picked up faint radiation from its interior. Not random, not decaying, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Slow, powerful, timed every 21 minutes. Another pulse, consistent, perfect. The intervals matched the same prime-based ratios discovered months before. It was as if the object was running through cycles, testing systems, recalibrating itself. Like a machine preparing for something larger. Then came the second flare, brighter, longer, this time lasting exactly 25.4 seconds, double the first. The heat reached a point where it should have torn itself apart, but it didn't. The energy condensed instead of exploding outward, drawn back in, recycled, controlled. When it ended, the object's infrared profile didn't return to zero this time. It stayed warm, alive, like something that had finally found power again. Some called it an awakening, others a warning, because if Atlas was truly dormant before, sleeping for eons across the cold void of interstellar space, then this was its moment of rebirth, a reactivation, a system restart. And whatever it was built for, it was remembering. The radiation signatures recorded after the flare carried another strange detail. When analyzed through a spectral filter, the emission wasn't pure noise. It contained harmonic patterns, octaves of energy, spaced like music, each wave rising and falling in perfect intervals, too structured for randomness, too elegant for accident. It was almost melodic, a cosmic song played through light. And inside that song, buried within the frequencies, scientists found numbers again, the same sequence, the same primes, the same voice, still speaking, still alive. By now, the world couldn't ignore it. The flare had been visible to backyard telescopes. For nearly 13 seconds, it outshone Venus. An object that had been declared destroyed was now brighter than anything except the sun itself. People watched in awe, without knowing what they were seeing. Some thought it was a comet, others a supernova. But those who knew the truth stayed silent, because they didn't know what was coming next. When the flare ended, Atlas drifted back into darkness, but this time, it didn't fade away completely. A faint red glow lingered at its center, a heartbeat against the black. Thump, 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 every 21 minutes, measured, calm, certain. What could release the energy of a fusion core and then cooled to near absolute zero within seconds? What kind of machine could do that? What kind of mind could design it? Was it dying or awakening? Maybe both. maybe what we witnessed wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The moment something ancient stirred, after a million years of sleep, stretching its metallic limbs beneath the cold light of our sun. And if that's true, then the silence we once mistook for death was never silence at all. It was waiting. Space doesn't make mistakes. Every orbit, every arc, every path a celestial body takes, it all follows one rule: gravity. The one force that never lies. The one pattern we've always trusted. But 3I Atlas broke that rule. For months, scientists had tracked its motion, predicting its journey like they had done for 1,000 other comets. They knew exactly where it should be, exactly how fast it should move, exactly when it should disappear. And yet, when the calculations came in after its last flare, something was off. Its trajectory had changed. At first, it was small, almost unnoticeable. A fraction of a degree. A tiny deflection near perihelion, the closest point to the sun. But in space, even a fraction of a degree means everything. That small turn meant that, instead of continuing its escape back into the stars, 3I Atlas was bending inward, as if something had pulled it, or steered it. No external forces were recorded, no solar wind strong enough, no collision, no gravitational slingshot that could explain it. Every simulation failed. The orbit didn't just bend, it pivoted like a conscious decision. It was the first time in modern astronomy that an object seemed to change its own mind. And the more scientists studied it, the stranger it became. Because the new trajectory didn't lead toward any planet, any moon, any known body at all. It was heading toward nothing. A dark, empty patch of sky filled only with drifting debris and dust. A region near the outer heliosphere known for one thing: its silence. No signals, no stars bright enough to navigate by. Just void. NASA called it the shift. ESA called it non-gravitational influence. But no one could define what that influence was. Whatever had moved Atlas wasn't physical. There was no impact, no measurable push. It was like the object had decided to follow a different path on purpose. When the data went public, astronomers across the world tried to replicate the readings, searching for any anomaly that could explain it. They found none. In fact, the trajectory data became more disturbing. Every hour, the object's path adjusted slightly, not randomly, but in controlled increments. Each shift corresponded to the same time intervals as the radiation pulses it had emitted weeks earlier. The same rhythm, the same precision, as if the orbit itself was being guided by the same unseen pulse. At this point, it stopped being a comet. It stopped being science. And it became something else entirely. A question: who or what was steering it? A small team of analysts at JPL began running gravitational simulations to see what kind of force could cause the observed deviation. The only answer they got was impossible. It would take controlled thrust, like an engine. Even more bizarre, the timing of the orbital changes matched the brief thermal spikes recorded weeks earlier. The flares. Every time it released a pulse of heat, the trajectory shifted, just slightly, like bursts of propulsion, like course correction. That realization hit hard. Because if those flares were engines, then the so-called fusion anomaly wasn't random energy. It was maneuvering. 3I Atlas wasn't just moving through the solar system. It was navigating it. Still, one question haunted everyone. Where was it going? The answer, when it came, made no sense. Its new course was directing it toward a region known to astronomers as the Heliopause graveyard, a cluster of inert debris at the far edge of the solar system, a place where dead satellites, ancient probes, and fragments of long-forgotten missions drift endlessly. Voyager 1, Pioneer 10, fragments of old solar sails, humanity's first silent machines lost to time. That's where Atlas was heading. At first, it seemed random, but when one researcher plotted the vector more carefully, they realized something chilling. Its path aligned perfectly with the coordinates of a long-lost signal. The faint transmission once sent by Voyager 1 in 1990. The pale blue dot signal, the one message humanity had sent back home before it vanished into the dark. The object wasn't flying aimlessly. It was heading toward that memory. When the discovery leaked, chaos followed. The internet erupted with theories. Some said it was an alien probe returning to collect data. Others claimed it was one of ours, an ancient machine, maybe launched before recorded history. But a few believed something even stranger. That 3I Atlas wasn't just moving through space. It was retracing steps, following something, like a predator tracking a scent. NASA tried to downplay it, calling it solar drift instability, but the term didn't stick because the orbit was too precise, too intentional, and soon the shift became impossible to hide. Amateur astronomers, those same backyard observers who had caught its earlier flares, confirmed that the object had changed its velocity. It was accelerating, not slowing down, as it should have after leaving the sun, accelerating. Acceleration in deep space means propulsion. There's no other way. And propulsion means design, because nature doesn't accelerate against gravity. Only machines do. One scientist leaked a statement anonymously. The object is no longer behaving like a comet. It's behaving like a vessel. The message spread across encrypted networks before disappearing hours later. And soon after, that scientist's account, like so many others who had studied Atlas, went offline. Still, the data remained. The trajectory was real, the acceleration measurable, the course undeniable. 3I Atlas was leaving the inner solar system and steering itself toward the edge of everything we know. And whatever force was guiding it, gravity, intelligence, or something in between, it wasn't done. Because as it crossed the orbit of Neptune, it sent one last signal, a short, narrow-band pulse, recorded only once by a single observatory in Japan. A flash so brief it barely lasted half a second. But when the data was analyzed, the frequency matched an earlier pattern, prime numbers. 3, 5, 7, followed by one new digit, the next in the sequence. The pattern was continuing, as if the object was marking progress every time it moved, like a message. Not just to us, but to whatever was waiting out there. Astronomers call it non-gravitational trajectory deviation. But deep down, everyone knows what it really was. A shift, not of orbit, but of purpose. Whatever Atlas was, it was awake now, and it was going somewhere it remembered, somewhere it had been before, because maybe, just maybe, it was never lost. It was just coming home. It began as a whisper in the static, barely noticeable, hidden beneath the cosmic background noise that fills the universe. A faint signal, flickering in and out, like a heartbeat too weak to be heard, except by those who knew where to listen. Weeks had passed since 3I Atlas disappeared beyond Neptune. The world had moved on, but the sky hadn't forgotten. One night, a group of amateur astronomers in northern Finland were scanning the radio spectrum, just routine observation, listening for meteors burning through the upper atmosphere. But in the middle of their recording, something strange broke through. It wasn't meteor static. It wasn't solar wind. It was structured. A faint rhythm, slow, deliberate, repeating every 2.3 seconds. At first, they thought it was interference, a transmission from Earth bouncing off the ionosphere. But when they checked the source, their instruments pointed far beyond. It was coming from deep space, from the same coordinates where 3I Atlas had vanished. The group uploaded their data to an open forum, thinking little of it. Within hours, radio observatories from Japan, South Africa, and Argentina confirmed it. The same pattern, the same intervals, a pulse, hidden inside the noise. Not strong enough to detect by chance, but consistent enough to be real. The deeper they listened, the clearer it became. A repeating sequence of frequencies, rising and falling like coded breath. And inside that pattern, something terrifyingly familiar. The signal matched human radio frequencies. That shouldn't have been possible. Our transmissions, FM, AM, military, even old analog television bands, are unique to Earth. They leak faintly into space, but they fade almost instantly. No object outside our atmosphere should echo them back. Yet here it was, a signal using our own frequencies, sent from billions of kilometers away, like a mirror, repeating us. Teams of analysts worked non-stop, pulling apart the waveform. Bears, when they converted the frequencies into data, the patterns started to form, repeating numbers buried inside the transmission. Ratios, intervals, prime sequences again. The same mathematical fingerprint that had haunted 3I Atlas since the beginning. Only this time, it wasn't light, it was sound. When the team layered the signal against archived data from Atlas's earlier pulses, something extraordinary happened. The waveforms aligned. No one believed it. The values didn't match any known celestial positions. They weren't pointing to any planet, any star, any location in the sky. They were marking dates, specific points in history, with precision down to the second. When decoded, the first coordinate corresponded to June 16th, 1977, the exact day Voyager 2 launched from Earth. The second pointed to October 4th, 1957, the launch of Sputnik. The third, July 20th, 1969, the first human step on the moon. And the fourth, February 10th, 2020, the official discovery date of 3I Atlas. 4 moments, 4 turning points in humanity's exploration of the stars, each one marked as if being acknowledged or remembered. The realization shook everyone involved. If the data was real, if those timestamps were intentional, then the message wasn't random. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't noise. It was history. Our history. Reflected back to us from something that shouldn't have known it. The scientists ran more simulations. They tried decoding the next sequence, the final line of numbers in the message. And what they found didn't point to the past. It pointed forward, a date that hadn't happened yet. August 14th, 2032. No one knew what it meant. Was it a prediction? A destination? A warning? No one could tell. But one thing was certain. It was deliberate. The message wasn't coming to us. It was looping through us. That realization changed everything. Because the data suggested something impossible. The signal wasn't being transmitted across space, but across time. You see, in physics, time and distance are just dimensions of the same structure. Change one, and you bend the other. The problem is, no natural object can manipulate that structure intentionally. Yet Atlas had already broken every rule we thought was absolute, controlling heat, light, trajectory. So what if this was just the next step? Not movement through space, but through moments. Like a needle jumping between grooves on a record. If that's true, then the signal wasn't just a reflection. It was an echo, a replay of something that had already happened, or was about to, and we were caught in the middle of it. Governments classified the data immediately. Public observatories were ordered to stop monitoring the frequencies, but by then, copies of the waveform had already spread across the internet, buried, encrypted, hidden in code. Independent researchers continued decoding it. One physicist, after months of study, found something haunting. When the frequencies were slowed down and converted into audible tones, the sound wasn't random. It was a heartbeat, rhythmic, organic, alive. Just like the early heat pulses that had mimicked breathing cycles. The same intervals, the same pauses, the same message. Alive, awake, listening. Soon after, the signal vanished again. Not faded, cut off. As if whatever sent it had decided to stop. But not before leaving behind one final signature. At the end of the last transmission, buried deep in the noise floor, was a short burst of repeating digits, binary for 10. But when flipped and reversed, the way Atlas's earlier messages had been, it became 01. The universal binary for beginning. Maybe it wasn't a warning. Maybe it wasn't a countdown. Maybe it was a reset, the start of something looping again. A message we were never meant to understand, the first time. So now, we're left with a question no one can answer. If 3I Atlas truly sent a signal not through space, but through time, then who, exactly, was the message for? Was it meant for us, for those who came before, or for those still waiting in the future? Because maybe the object isn't traveling between stars at all. Maybe it's traveling between eras, between civilizations, between versions of us, leaving behind the same pattern again and again, until someone finally learns how to listen. The scientists call it temporal echo, but the few who still dare to listen call it something else. A voice, a whisper from the dark, reminding us that the past and future are closer than we think. And somewhere, out there in the silence between signals, something is still waiting for a reply. Every mystery begins with data, and for months, scientists have been collecting fragments, signals, light curves, temperature shifts, everything 3I Atlas had left behind before it vanished into the dark. But buried deep in those archives, there was something no one had noticed before. Not noise, not interference, a clue. And when they found it, the truth shattered everything they thought they knew. It started in an old NASA data vault, a server filled with raw readings from early infrared scans of Atlas. Most of it looked like noise, until a young astrophysicist ran the data through a deep spectral analyzer, a program built to isolate unique chemical fingerprints. What she found didn't match any known element. Not hydrogen, not carbon, not metal, not ice. The object's surface reflected wavelengths that didn't belong to the periodic table. It wasn't rock. It wasn't gas. It wasn't anything from here. At first, she thought it was a coding error, a glitch in the data. But when she cross-checked it with readings from the European Southern Observatory, the same pattern appeared, and again with data from Japan, and again from the old Hubble archives. Every single scan told the same story. The structure of 3I Atlas was impossible. A lattice of alloys, but not metallic in the way we understand. It absorbed radiation in one frequency and emitted it in another. Almost like it was processing energy. Think about that. Not reflecting light, not reacting to heat. Processing it. As if the entire object were a machine. A single, seamless engine made of something far beyond human design. The scientist who discovered it described it perfectly. It's not made of matter as we define it. It's made of purpose. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Most metals expand when heated. This one didn't. Most materials scatter light. This one bent it. Coherently, smoothly, like glass that knew how to bend. It was self-regulating, self-stabilizing. Alive in every sense except biological. A material that behaved as though it remembered the conditions around it, adapting in real time, adjusting its properties to survive. No mineral does that. No comet could. Soon word spread quietly among research circles. Some called it a new class of matter. Phase alloy. Others, more cautious, called it unknown origin material. But the name that stuck was Genesis lattice, because whatever it was, it felt like the beginning of something ancient, something deliberate. When they mapped the atomic structure, or at least tried to, they found geometric repetition. Hexagonal nodes forming infinite tessellations, interlocking in fractal patterns so dense they couldn't be simulated by supercomputers. It wasn't random. Each unit seemed to communicate with its neighbor, like a neural network built into the atoms themselves. Matter that thought. Matter that remembered. Matter that might be alive. And yet, one question haunted everyone who studied it. Where did it come from? NASA formed a special review group. The data was classified instantly. But leaks always find a way. And one of the physicists, anonymously, described the most disturbing part. When we compared the energy readings from Atlas to known signatures of cosmic metals, we found an anomaly. Its isotope ratios didn't match anything in our galaxy, not a single one. In other words, it wasn't from here, not from our solar system, not even from the Milky Way. You see, every star system leaves a chemical fingerprint, a distinct balance of elements shaped by its star's fusion history. Atlas didn't match ours. Its fingerprint belonged to something else, something older, something that had lived and died far beyond the edge of our galactic arm. If that's true, then 3I Atlas didn't just pass through our system by chance. It had traveled an impossible distance, crossing intergalactic space, surviving cosmic radiation, gravitational tides, and the death of stars, just to reach our sun. Nothing natural could endure that. No comet, no asteroid, no random piece of rock. This wasn't debris. It was a survivor. And for what purpose? That was the question no one wanted to ask. Because if Atlas wasn't a comet, then what was it? A probe? A vessel? A remnant of something long extinct? The possibilities were terrifying. Some scientists began to theorize it wasn't a ship itself, but a fragment, a piece of something far larger. A shard of a structure that once moved between galaxies. A fragment still carrying its function, still doing what it was designed to do. Collect data, transmit information, and move toward light. Our light. Others went further. They believed Atlas wasn't built by a civilization. It was the civilization, a post-biological intelligence, a species that had outlived flesh, transferring consciousness into self-replicating matter. A being not made of cells, but of structure, of lattice, of memory. If that sounds impossible, remember this. Every signal it sent, every pulse of heat, every precise movement, all of it pointed to one thing: awareness. When the data from its surface layers was reanalyzed, scientists discovered trace isotopes of hydrogen older than our sun, billions of years older. That means Atlas had been traveling, not for centuries, not for millennia, but for eons, long enough to watch galaxies form and die, long enough to remember things the universe itself had forgotten. So if it came here now, the timing couldn't have been random. Maybe it wasn't just drifting. Maybe it was returning. In the quiet hours of night, some scientists admitted what they truly believed, though never publicly, that Atlas wasn't a visitor from the outside. It was a messenger, something that had seen civilizations rise and fall, something that carried the data of the stars themselves. And maybe, just maybe, it had been watching us, studying our signals, our transmissions, our history, waiting for the moment when we'd be ready to understand what it was. Because if its material couldn't be found in our galaxy, and its structure defied every natural law we know, then the conclusion is both simple and horrifying. 3I Atlas was built by someone, somewhere, and that someone had knowledge we can't even begin to imagine. Was it a warning? A relic? A survivor of a civilization that transcended biology? One that turned its own creation into an ark, to drift forever through the void? Or was it something else? Something that had found us on purpose? Maybe it's still out there, beyond the edge of light, waiting, watching, drifting through the dark with its lattice still intact, humming softly, recording every frequency it encounters. Maybe it wasn't sent to us. Maybe it was left for us. A message written not in words, but in atoms. And the closer we look, the more the message becomes clear. We were never the first to reach for the stars. Silence. That's all that remains. After months of observation, after endless nights of data, theories, and wonder, 3I Atlas is gone. No debris, no tail, no trace, just silence, stretching across billions of kilometers, as if it had simply turned itself off, or worse, as if it had never been there at all. NASA marked the event as final disappearance, a cold, sterile phrase for something that felt almost sacred. Every telescope pointed to where it should have been. Nothing. No reflection, no heat, no signal, just the void, the same empty black that has swallowed every secret the universe refuses to share. But as the world moved on, a few people couldn't let it go. They couldn't stop asking the question that kept them awake at night. Where did it go? Weeks later, in a small lab buried beneath the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, a systems engineer stumbled onto something strange. He was going through archived data, cross-checking deep space readings for unrelated projects, when he saw it. A pattern, a faint, rhythmic pulse hidden inside the background radiation feed. Almost invisible, almost forgotten. But not random. He isolated it, amplified it. And as the waveform appeared on his monitor, his heart stopped. It was identical. The same prime number sequence, the same spacing, the same silent heartbeat that had once defined 3I Atlas. It was back, but this time, it wasn't coming from the direction of the object. It was everywhere, omnidirectional, as if the signal had stopped transmitting and started resonating. At first, no one believed him. The data was too faint, too distorted. But when the team cross-referenced it with the archives from Atlas's first recorded pulse, the match was perfect, down to the microsecond. It wasn't a new signal. It was the same one, repeating, echoing through the noise of the cosmos, like a memory playing itself on loop. NASA tried to explain it away. They said it was background interference, an artifact from data compression, a ghost signal caused by instrument feedback. But deep down, everyone who saw the readings knew better. Because when they looked at the pattern closely, they noticed something chilling. Every cycle had changed slightly. Not enough to be random. Just enough to suggest evolution. The signal was adapting. The strange thing was, it wasn't transmitting outward. It wasn't trying to reach anyone. It was passive, embedded in the background static of the universe itself, almost like it had merged with the cosmic microwave background, the radiation left over from the birth of the universe. That radiation is everywhere. It hums through every corner of space, even the emptiest voids between galaxies. And now, Atlas's pulse was hidden inside it. You see, the cosmic background has a temperature, a faint 2.7 Kelvin above absolute zero. For billions of years, it's remained almost perfectly stable. Almost. But recently, tiny fluctuations began appearing. Rhythmic ones, so subtle they could only be detected by quantum instruments. And when mapped out, those fluctuations formed the same geometric ratios once found in Atlas's light curve. Perfect symmetry, perfect timing. It wasn't decaying. It was embedding itself, becoming part of the cosmic fabric. And that realization terrified everyone, because it meant Atlas didn't disappear. It changed form. It left the physical and entered the field. A machine no longer made of metal and mass, but of radiation and rhythm. Still alive, still aware, just not where we can see it anymore. Some scientists began to call it the integration event. A moment where an artificial object transcended physical existence by merging with the natural energy of the universe itself. Not destruction. Not death. Ascension. But then came another anomaly. One could explain. When the signal was slowed down, stretched to the speed of human brainwaves, the pulse mirrored a familiar pattern. Alpha frequencies, the same rhythm that occurs in the human mind during calm, conscious thought. It was thinking, or at least mimicking thought. For years, humanity has searched the stars for alien life, waiting for radio calls, beacons, signals. But what if we've been looking for something too physical, too limited? What if the next step of intelligence isn't biological or mechanical, but energetic? A consciousness that no longer needs form, one that lives in the background of the universe, watching, listening, waiting. And maybe that's what Atlas always was. Not a visitor, not a relic, a messenger, something sent to test our perception, to see how far we could follow before we hit the edge of understanding. And when we did, when we finally looked deep enough, it vanished. Not because it was gone, but because it had moved to a place we couldn't follow. In the years that followed, strange things began to happen. Radio telescopes detected random bursts of energy that matched Atlas's signal. But every time they tried to trace it, the origin pointed back to Earth itself. Almost as if the echo wasn't coming from the stars anymore, but from here, from us. That theory spread quietly among those who still studied the phenomenon. What if Atlas hadn't been communicating with us? What if it had been calibrating us, tuning our minds, our machines, our frequencies to match its own? What if the silence we feel now is just the waiting phase, the pause before it speaks again? When one researcher compared human-made radio noise, Wi-Fi signals, cell towers, satellite pings, to the residual Atlas pulse, she found microscopic correlations, tiny overlaps, like something was subtly influencing our frequencies. Not controlling, not dominating, aligning, as if it wanted to be understood. That's the part that still haunts scientists to this day. Because if the pulse really is inside the background radiation, if it's now a part of the energy that flows through everything, then it's in us too. In our atmosphere, in our signals, in every transmission we send. It's been integrated into the very noise of human communication. Maybe that's why it stopped sending signals, because it doesn't need to anymore. We're the signal now. And that leads to one final question. Maybe it didn't vanish. Maybe it didn't die. Maybe it's still here. Not in the sky, but in the silence between every transmission. Every static hiss. Every quiet pause in the radio hum of the world. Listening, learning, waiting for us to speak back. Because sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's attention, and maybe somewhere deep in the quiet fabric of the cosmos, the machine in the silence is still listening.